All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you. You won't get to choose how long you're here. You won't know how many sunrises you have left. You don't get to rewind, pause, or skip the hard chapters. All you get is now. This moment, this breath, and most people waste it. Waiting for the perfect timing, for clarity, for permission.
For those of us living a life where our purpose doesn't need permission, capturing fulfillment and meaning in every moment we're alive. This is the Live This Life podcast. I'm your host, Heath Cummings. I'm here to inspire you to ask yourself the question every day. Are you living? Are you killing time? Hey family, welcome back to the Live This Life podcast. I am your host, Heath Cummings, sitting here in the rare quiet mornings. I don't usually record first thing in the morning, but here I am in one of the quiet mornings of Northfield, Massachusetts with a half-empty cup of coffee and a little bit of celebration on my mind of hitting just a little bit of a milestone of episode 150. A lot of podcasts don't ever make it this far, and I didn't know if I was going to, at a certain point in the last few years. So I'm grateful. I'm very grateful to still be here on the microphone and reaching out to you all and to be back on an upward trajectory of life in general. And that's what I'm here for, is to get you on the same upward trajectory of your own life. And I'm grateful that you chose to spend the time with me today on this amazing subject. This is one that I hope really does inspire a lot of people, because this comes as a bit of motivation that is sparked inside of me talking to a few people that are very close to me and judging a bit about their pasts. And, likely something inside of you is going to resonate with this, sort of that quiet voice that tends to stir in your chest like a divine nudge sometimes. And that divine nudge maybe brought you to this episode. Nothing happens by chance at all. I don't believe in coincidences, only synchronicities. It's a way that I've really adopted things in the last few years. There's too significant of a synchronicity to call it a mere coincidence. The chances of certain things happening in life, 1 million to 1, 10 million to 1. There's no way these things can sometimes happen. It's sort of like a magical conglomerate of life paths that just bring us to a certain point. And sometimes those life paths can come from some extreme places, and they can lead us down roads that we may not fully understand, ones that we might actually resent at a certain point. And I know a lot of people, which has motivated me to do this episode, are carrying a lot of weight from those different paths that have brought them to the place that they are in life. Paths that maybe whispered some lies about who you really are. Maybe you've been stuck in cycles that you didn't actually create in your life. There were circumstances that were out of your control, and they've ultimately led you to feel a certain way about where you've ended up in a place. Maybe you feel stuck and you're ready for more out of your own life. And if that's true, that means you're ready to really start living and stop killing time. And this episode is hopefully going to be the catalyst of the change in your life for just that reason. The question that is the heartbeat of this podcast, and really has been from the start, is that message. Are you living, or are you just killing time? Because in my own journey, I have felt that way. I felt that at certain points I've lost time and wasted time. And it's the commodity that we just don't get back in our life. It's the most precious thing that we can actually have. The thing that has the most value beyond any money or possessions or anything else. It is just time. You can't buy more of it. And today, on episode 150, a milestone that just feels, I don't know, it's heavy with meaning and I guess a sense of responsibility to just kick this next phase off of the podcast, of going forward with this newest season, however long the season lasts, and kick everything forward from episode 150 onward. And it just sort of has a fire lit within me. I've kind of gotten my stride over the last few months of jumping back into the podcast and getting guests set up and doing everything else. And it's time to just jump into the fire together. And this is an episode I've been sitting on for a little while. I'm like, you know what? This is the perfect time for it. This isn't going to be a light conversation. This is a very raw and honest look at your own life. You know, it's very soul level type of work. And we're talking about overcoming adversities. Like, we have a lot in the course of this show, but these adversities can sometimes define you. Those are the ones that I really want to focus on today. Not the ones that someone else has let define you, but the ones that you've let define you. The family dynamics that can sometimes, shape our life in the earliest years, and they just transmute all the way through our years as we get older. And sometimes they can be in painful ways. There's different traumatic events that we can also go through that leave scars on your body and your mind and your spirit, things that were out of your control. And then there's sometimes the societal restrictions that people are tied to. And, obviously it's not by choice. Sometimes those things are race or income or class or backgrounds, the expectations that are tied to you in a way that isn't fair. And they sometimes tell you what you can and cannot become in your own life. And those things are just false chains that don't actually exist. They can feel like extremely heavy chains, but it's like that metaphor of when someone takes a baby elephant back in, when they had elephants in circuses, which I hope for the most part, it's kind of a foregone thing at this point. But they would take a baby elephant and they would chain its foot down with, a simple wooden spike. And the elephant would just get used to that chain and that spike being its range of motion. It can't go any further. And it would reach the end of that chain and realize that's as far as it can go. And it would just basically have that chain around its ankle, and it would just wander in circles around that single chain. But as that elephant would grow older and stronger, it could easily break that chain. It could rip that peg right up out of the ground. But it had become so used to that tether being the thing that defined how far it could actually go in its little world of existence, that it didn't even realize it had the power, the very, very easy amount of power to break that chain and be free. And your life is no different. And that's what I want to say in this episode. Your past does not get the final say. Your traumas don't own your identity. Your family wounds don't dictate your worth. The boxes that society tries to put you in because of the color of your skin or the balance in your bank account or the neighborhood that you grew up in or the limitations that get projected on you for whatever reason, those boxes do not cap your potential. You are the author of now. You get to rewrite your entire story. You get to decide who you become from this point forward. So I know this message is going to land differently with each and every person. For some people, this might not be something that strikes them very deep. For others, it may shake everything up in your day-to-day from this moment forward. For some, it might bring people to tears because you've carried a silent pain for decades, and I know what that's like. For some, it might spark anger, but if it does, I'm going to say this: direct that anger in a very healthy way, an anger that says basically that I'm done. I'm done letting this control me. And for many people, it might ignite that very quiet hope that you've been protecting like a fragile flame in your own life, and you might not even have realized it. Whatever it stirs within you, stay with me, because this episode, no matter where you're coming from, I feel like is written for pretty much every one of you listening right now. But I'm going to get personal right off from the start. As a two-time cancer survivor, the first diagnosis, this really is what motivated me to talk about this entire thing. I've had different adversities and we've all had different roads. That's one thing that I want to make sure everybody hears of. People have had way worse times than me. And people may feel like, oh, well, I've had nowhere near the tough, adversities of other people. It's not a comparative. It's really not what this is all about. So, if you listen to certain stories from certain people and you're like, wow, I have nothing to be down and out about. I haven't been through half the stuff that some of these other people have. It's not that. Everybody judges their own adversities in their life in a certain way. And what's extremely traumatizing to one person might be a cakewalk for another. It's not what it's all about. It's about recognizing that the places that we've come from define who we are only in a way where we allow tomorrow to be dictated by what those things actually were in our life. And that's what I want to get through to everybody today, is that your tomorrow can shift after you've changed your mindset on where your past has come from, and that your past does not define you at all. So when I had some of the first diagnosis, the very first one that I had, it hit like a freight train. I never saw any of it coming, and suddenly my world narrowed from this broad spectrum of where my career was going and things about family life and fitness and where I was going to do things in boxing and all these other dreams that I had. And it's just literally like everything else came to a halt. A healthy person wants a million different things, and a sick person wants one thing. They just don't want to be sick anymore. And my world completely narrowed in that first trip. Doctor's visits were pretty much the first thing, CAT scans and biopsies and treatments. And it just felt like it was completely stripping me down to nothing. And I had to go in these chemo rooms where I saw people fighting for their lives, and hours stretched into eternity in these hospital rooms and these waiting rooms and everything. And nights were where fear kind of sat on my chest night after night, and it whispered that, hey, you might want to get ready for this. You might not want to hear it, but you got to get ready that this might be the end of the story. And then the second battle, when that one came, it was even like a worse one, even though I knew the terrain, the uncertainty of this is happening again. It's a little more serious, cut even deeper. And I'd already tasted at a certain point how fragile everything really was in life. And for some reason, the second run was a whole other lesson. It was more serious than the first. But cancer wasn't the only adversity that I walked through that put me through the flames. Before that diagnosis, there were family dynamics that felt like emotional quicksand, homes that sometimes didn't feel safe and the air felt thick, and, patterns of communication or lack of those patterns of communication taught me survival, I guess, rather than thriving. That over giving sometimes and over impressing for the sake of trying to be noticed is what you were supposed to do. Trying to stay optimistically positive at all points just for the sake of keeping the peace was something that was normal. There were moments where, money was tight and opportunities seemed like it was reserved for people who were outside of me and what it was capable of, because of my whole entire situation. It just wasn't. There were certain dreams that you weren't allowed to dream, I guess. There were subtle and not so subtle message from the world sometimes that said, this dream just might not be for someone like you. So, I felt that, and I felt the weight of those limits. And I've had days where the past had screamed at me so loud that it drowned out any visions that I had of the future. And I've heard that same exact sentiment from so many different people who have come from different places and moved through that to get to the other side of those. And now they're allowed to dream, but they were like, wow, at a certain point, I was never allowed to dream. Like the weight of life was holding me down so much that I just literally couldn't open my eyes to look into the world of potential of what my dreams could actually manifest into. It was basically that chain that maybe at a certain point in their life, some of those things were true. Maybe there wasn't advantages there. You didn't know how to do certain things. At certain ages, we don't know how to navigate the world in some profound way. But that's just that baby elephant with the chain. Like, yes, granted, maybe that baby elephant couldn't break away from the chain at the time, but eventually you outgrew that. And you're at that point in your life now, likely, if you're listening to this show, you're at the point where that chain is literally just a farce. It's a facade of what you're actually capable of in your life. And somewhere in the middle of it all, things shift. I remember that I shifted into a certain point where the suffering, it didn't break me anymore. I let it forge a fire. And it's like a certain point. You can't pinpoint the point in life when that switch actually gets flipped, but you just remember the feeling before and after, It's basically a refusal to let the old chapters of your story write the ending that's in front of you. I remember just having a fire and determination to alchemize every single wound I'd ever been in or ever been experienced to at a certain point and alchemize it into something so much bigger, alchemize it into some sort of higher level of wisdom. Take every one of those hard lessons that I had to learn and turn it into something that was a profound bit of wisdom to share with somebody else. Every scar, turn it into strength. Every single limitation, and turn that into fuel for life, a fuel for life of the life that I actually really wanted to live, not one that was just being handed to me and I had to basically digest it. It was the one that I truly wanted. And that's what I want for you in this episode. We're not here to pretend that life is all sunshine and rainbows. We're not here to paint the pretty picture that there's no pain and that the pain in your life that you did experience didn't happen. That's not what this is all about. We're here to honor it fully and integrate it into your life, and then consciously choose a new narrative altogether, completely and entirely a whole new narrative of the place that you've been. We're here to take that point, the one that maybe sometimes people like me can't sort of pinpoint. I want your pinpointed era of your life to be right now. Right after you've listened to this episode, I want that switch to be flipped. So you can say, you know what, one time there was this podcast that really lit this fire within me. And ever since that day, everything in my life completely changed. That was the switch that was flipped. And whether it takes weeks or months for that transition to happen, let today be day one. Let it be that trendy thing that you see on social media of where people say, one day or day one. This is your day one. It's not one day you're going to get things under control. It's day one. The one day that says, I will not be defined by what tried to destroy me. I'll become who I was created to be here and now. So take a deep breath with me right now. Inhale, hold, exhale, because from here on out, you're safe. You're safe here. This space is for healing and for awakening and for stepping into your power. So we're going to dive really deep in this episode. All right, guys. Now, before we dive too deep, I want you to go ahead and subscribe to the show on whatever platform that you're listening on so that you can find your way back to us whenever you want. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and like this video as well. The more activity the content gets, the more it gets actually pushed out to the light of day. I'm learning so much different stuff about how these things actually work. You can't just throw them out there. You got to try to get people to engage. So if you guys are listening to this on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so it will shed some light on the podcast and get it in front of more eyes and ears of the world. As of April of 2026, we're actually moving upward on the charts again, which is something I said I was not going to get fixated on once we got the show back on track, because I think that can just deter the creative juices. It was a great honor in 2024 to make #1 in certain countries. Lithuania, we were huge in Lithuania, but it was #1 in spirituality in their country for a short period of time, which was just an amazing prospect. But if it doesn't make it that far, then it doesn't make it that far. It's not why we're doing it. We're doing it to just put some positive stuff out there in the world. But ultimately, would I love this show to be back on the top of the charts? Would I love this show to be my bread and butter, to be everything that I do with my day? Absolutely. I got a long way to go until I hit that. But you guys are the way that I would actually get there. So your love, your support, your continued listenership, and just pushing us out there in every way possible is what's going to make it happen. Officially, we are hitting the top 200 out of 4.5 million podcasts in the world. We are hitting the top 200 in several different countries, in New Zealand and in the Netherlands. So shout out to both those countries and everybody listening there. I see we're climbing the quickest in both of those places. So hello, and thank you very much for tuning in. And I'd like to pay it forward to, if you'd like to pay it forward, if you would like to pay it forward for the show, leave the comments on the episodes, wherever you happen to see them, wherever you happen to listen. The show ratings and reviews also help us reach new listeners on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And please remember to join that mailing list and get exclusive free content that expands every single episode on livethislife.org. Those are getting much more regular and streamlined. Squarespace is helping out with that. A huge shout out to Squarespace. They're the ones who host the podcast website as well as the newsletters that come through it. So a big shout to them. Not a sponsor, but maybe someday they might be. I'm going to read a few of the comments that just came in recently, just a couple of quick ones. I knew there were more out there, but I just dog-eared a couple of them. This one's from David Dreaming, left this comment on Spotify about episode 147, Close the Cycle, Ignite the Next. David Dreaming simply says, fabulous episode, Heath. And that's it. Thank you very much, David Dreaming, for leaving that comment. That one was followed up on the same day by a user called Grace Unlimited. And this person writes, thank you. I am an omnist and new to your podcast. So blessed today. I finally know that the only calendar or time frame that I will follow is Mother Nature and Father Time. So, yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for leaving that comment. And on the subject of omnism, I'm actually going to be firing up some of the episodes. The very next episode is going to be another episode of oneness. I think it's going to be chapters 12 and 13. So that's going to be coming out within the next week. And we're going to be firing up a whole bunch of episodes. I've got some guests that are ready to go, and we're hopefully going to be getting on a weekly release schedule at this point, which I'm super excited about. I've been waiting for this forever, and we're finally getting there. But yeah, the omnism stuff is actually going to fire up quite a bit. There has been a huge interest. I have gotten so many emails and so many messages on omnism. I guess there's a lot of people who are really diving into what that actually is. So I will be firing up a bit more of my efforts to talk about that a bit more on the show and have exclusive episodes that focus on just that subject. And they take a little bit of a deep dive into the spirituality of different aspects of religion and spirituality and what that actually means, a higher connection to source and all that stuff. And I've got some pretty fascinating ones. The next one that I'm going to be talking about has to do with AI. So I'll give you guys a little bit of a tidbit on that one. How that subject and AI actually relate to each other, because there was something fascinating that I came across. And I'm not a huge fan of AI, although it's kind of there and unavoidable. But this subject, when that episode comes out, you guys got to tune into it. It's fascinating. So I'll leave it at that. And then we just got a couple of messages from the companies that help make this podcast possible. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. The world can get heavy at times. It's normal to need someone to help you lift the weight. You wouldn't go to someone who doesn't know how to manage money, to handle your finances, or a doctor who knows nothing about keeping you healthy. Then why do we turn to people in our lives for help or advice who really don't know how to get us through life's difficulties? That's where BetterHelp comes in. I've been very open about my struggles with mental health over the years, and BetterHelp has been monumental in my ongoing therapy. Not only do they have a journal through the BetterHelp app so you can write things down and get them in the open with your therapist, so you can get them up to speed ahead of your session, and you can actually get down to business when it's time to meet with your therapist. That was one of the biggest selling points for me, but there are so many other features on the BetterHelp app as well. They have a long list of classes, group sessions, and online lessons that you can dive into from the comfort of wherever you might be. I mean, what's better than taking a therapy session in the middle of a walk through nature, right? Join the solution that millions have subscribed to. Visit betterhelp.com/livethislife to get started and get 10% off your first month of therapy. That's betterhelp.com/livethislife. All supplements were not created equal. I hear other big podcasters out there promote superfoods and scoops of powder that are supposedly all-inclusive. Well, unfortunately, that means it could also include literal poisons, including glyphosate and other pesticides, which are everywhere in today's food supply. Everywhere, that is, except for Organifi. They are one of the only brands that has this symbol certifying it's glyphosate-free. And if you know what that stuff is, literal weed killer, you'd know how important it is to avoid it at all costs. Organifi has been with this show from the start. It's a pillar in my life, and the before and after effects of its benefits are palatable. People ask, dude, what's your secret? And I tell them it's no secret, it's Organifi. Invest in your health today. Check out everything this company has to offer. Go to OrganifiShop.com. That's OrganifiShop.com and use the coupon code LiveThisLife, all one word, at checkout and save 15% on every single order. Head to the link in the show description for their products. That's OrganifiShop.com. In life, adversity doesn't arrive with a warning label. It shows up in ways of our lives that matter most. It kind of shows up in our life in the spots where maybe it's going to impact us in the greatest ways. It shows up in our families. It shows up in our bodies. It shows up in our minds. And it shows up in the larger world around us in ways that we can't predict, in ways that obviously aren't controllable. And the best way to slay the beast is to identify it. The best way to overcome those adversities is to give it a name and go after it. And the way you go after it is a term that I'm coining as the modality metamorphosis. And there's 3 core pillars of the modality metamorphosis. The way that we're going to change the routines in our lives that are going to alchemize every one of these different aspects that has sort of been the chains that hold us back. The first core pillar are the inherited roots of your life, healing the family wounds, the DNA legacies that are basically tied to us at times that predate even our own existence, the genetic patterns that are carried from generation to generation into now, and taking the potential epigenetics and eliminating those gene keys into an expression that's something completely different. If you're not familiar with epigenetics, I highly, highly suggest that you go look up Dr. Joe Dispenza. Tons of stuff with him on YouTube and all over social media, but if you're not familiar with him, you definitely should be. If you are, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. But his information that he shares on epigenetics and how we can actually change some of the DNA expressions in our own bodies is absolutely mind-breaking, mind-boggling, and is groundbreaking. It is mind-breaking because some of the stuff that he talks about is stuff that just, you had no idea it was even possible. You have no idea what you're actually capable of. And this guy just puts so much hope in some of the studies that he's done. He's just an amazing person. He's definitely a massive world changer. So if you're not familiar with him, go check him out. But basically, we're releasing the patterns of those things that were passed down through generations. So you stop carrying those ancestral burdens in your body and in your behaviors, and you're ultimately putting a stopping point and not letting the next generation carry it on. You can be the break in those cycles and alchemize everything going forward for not only yourself, but generations to come. Pillar number 2 is the personal trauma recovery. Basically, you rewire your nervous system and the emotional imprints from your own life experiences and transform the pain that you might have experienced into presence, into resilience, and into a whole different level of self-mastery that you may have never dreamed that you could even experience in your own life. And then the last one is the societal liberation, basically breaking free from the external boxes and predetermined ceilings of race and income and class and gender and expectations and zip code and last names and accents, all the other systemic barriers that can tend to limit the full expression of a person's potential because of what you might even just let society do for you, because there's no reason why any of those things should hold you back. It's that chain that you taught was strong enough to hold you back when in all reality, it's not. And a modality is just a fancy word for routine. You know, your responses right here and now, the things that just are coming to you automatically are your routine. It's your habit based on past learned behavior. That's simply it. And what we are going to do is we're going to actually change that. We're going to change the roots that create those routines. You're going to turn your inherited chains into liberated wings through changing each one of these modalities. So let's dive into each one of these individually for a minute. So the first modality, the one that is probably the biggest one, we're going to hit it first, is the family wounds. Those inherited family cycles can feel like they're woven into your DNA, and it can feel like they're somewhat unescapable. So many of us have grown up in homes where love was present, but maybe it was complicated. Some of us grew up where it wasn't present at all. I was fortunate enough to not be in one of those places. But some of us, we had parents. My parents were extremely young. They gave what they could. They did the best that they could at the time. I think if they would have been able to change the decisions, my parents have told me that many times, if we could have done things differently, we would have. But they gave what they could, and they likely came from broken circumstances on their own. I know both of my parents passed very well, and it was a far cry from perfection. I couldn't imagine living through some of the circumstances that both of them lived through, and I'm thankful that I didn't have to. I had my own stuff I had to get over. I wouldn't want to live through what they had, and I'm sure my kid says the same thing about me when I talk about some of the stuff from my past. But, our parents, I think for the most part, they a lot of them give what they can when they can. But they were broken from their own unhealed pain at certain points. Generational trauma isn't just some kind of a phrase or some trendy bullshit. Like it's for real. It's the father who never learned to express his emotions because his father shut them down with silence or anger or whatever else was happening. It's the mother who struggled to nurture because no one ever really nurtured her in the way that she needed. It's the subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, the loud messages that taught you your worth was tied to presence and perfection and staying small, maybe, for the sake of making others feel big because of the egos that existed in some of the households. I remember nights as a kid where you were afraid of the emotional temperature in the house. And I'm not just talking my home. I mean, it was just the whole family dynamic sometimes. You were worried about how it could shift without warning. You almost had to be prepared for the fight at all times because sometimes a storm came brewing in without warning. I've unpacked things in the last few years. I remember being able to unpack through some of the hypnotic regressions and stuff like that. Always feeling like you were on a razor sharp edge, because that's essentially what survival teaches us. It teaches us to stay on that razor sharp edge so that you're ready for whatever could pop up, because it could pop up at any given time. And those were patterns that I never actually realized that I carried into adulthood until I went through some of the serious healing modalities like the ones I'm talking about. The tendency to shut down rational thinking for people who have been in those kind of places when conflict can just arise out of nowhere. You resort to a survival modality, and you carry that into your adulthood. The habit of overgiving also carries into adulthood to prove that you were worthy of being heard and you were deserving of some sort of attention that wasn't negative, or the habit of fearing to set a boundary. This was another one of fearing that if you did set a boundary, that it wasn't allowed and that it was immediately going to be conquered by somebody else. So you didn't even bother to set those boundaries. And sometimes that carries into your adult life. You don't actually set the boundaries in your adult life because you learned at a younger age. You just don't do that. Somebody wants to overreach in a place they shouldn't. Who are you to say? And so people carry that into their lives as adults, and they have a very hard time setting those boundaries. It was easier to give up than it was to hold the line as a kid, so they carry that into adulthood. And the thing is, these may not have always been daily traumatic events. They don't have to be. It didn't have to be something that was a constant daily thing. The mind is very moldable back then. So even if it was only limited circumstances that some of these things popped up in life, it can shape the way that we view the world long into our futures. It shows up in our future relationships and how we view our own value and how we protected our own hearts and minds. And if this sounds familiar to you, don't worry, like, you're seen. Like, this is not just something that is exclusive to you, obviously. You might have grown up with, addiction in the family, emotional neglect, verbal criticism disguised as they're just trying to help you and you're being overly sensitive. Like, I know a lot of people have been in those places. The rigid expectations, those are there a lot too. They left very little room for your true self to come out. You had to do the family job, or you were supposed to take on this, or you were supposed to go to college, get out, get a career, have a family, have a bunch of kids, and that was the life you were supposed to live. And if you didn't do anything within that box, then you were doing it wrong, and you probably heard about it, and you probably still are to this day if you're still not living up to those expectations. And that doesn't allow for a very efficient expression of your truest self. And when you step out of that box, your family expects certain things. And if you don't live up to those expectations, you become that black sheep. And I know so many people can resonate with that as well. I talk to a lot of the black sheeps. For some reason, us black sheeps attract so many more to the flock, and we're just this big black cloud of fluffy black sheep, and we're just stomping through life. But the black sheeps do tend to gravitate toward each other. They know what they've been through, and most of them think in certain independent ways, and that's what makes them, attract to one another. Being told that you're being too much or too sensitive, when you're acting a certain way, you're expressing your way in a certain way, or you're trying to express that boundary that you were never allowed to set. It gets you outside of the box of expectation, and therefore you start to feel like an outcast in your own life, your home, your family. But that was then, and this is now. You're stronger now, and you don't have to be afraid to have that boundary and know that you're strong enough that you can have someone test it now. That chain was a false one, and you're strong enough to pull that chain apart. And you're also strong enough to set that boundary and not have to worry about somebody immediately breaking it down. Life is different than it was when some of your unhealthy patterns were forged. And that's the good news. It genuinely is the good news, is that the awareness of these traits is the first powerful cut in those chains. When you can look at the patterns of your life and say, this happened to me, but it's not who I am. You create a space for your choices to take root. But when those roots change the patterns that emerge out of them and into the trunk of the tree of your life, that is exactly when everything changes in your life. At that point, you'll see that shift. You'll see that turning point in your life be very poignant. You'll be able to point to it. And you can honor your family's journey. I'm not saying you have to become the black sheep to transcend this one section. You can send love and compassion for the pain that they may have carried, while firmly also deciding for your own sanity in your own life that the cycle breaks with me. Each one of those small declarations that you can make about your own life, that my life is going to be this way, I am going to do this thing. Every one of those declarations, those flags that you stick into the top of the mountain, have ripple effects across your entire life. And those ripple effects will not happen until you make those declarations. I wasn't the perfect parent myself by any means. My son saw me lose my shit in ways that I hate to admit, but I do. There were many times that I admitted to him, even in the last few years, that the way that I acted was not okay. You know, I'd have to sit and chat with him and just say, hey, you know, I'm sorry for saying these things. I'm sorry you saw that. Do not be that kind of man to your wife. Do not be that kind of father around your kids. Don't say those kinds of things, because it's a really crappy feeling afterwards to know that that was the example that you set. And that was a horrible example for me to set. And I hope that you learned something better. I hope you learned what not to do by my actions, and don't take those things as that was okay. My kid's pretty bright, so, you know, he very well aware of that. But I think heading those things off and discussing those things is not okay is a massive part of that transformation as well. That in and of itself helps break the cycle going into future generations. You know, I take solace in the fact that my son's life isn't going to be spent with nights hiding behind a closed door while there's screaming outside of the room and, you know, things breaking, and worrying that the door is going to fling open and it's go time. You know, it's not something that his life ever contained. And each one of those links in the chain that got cut along the way and fell to the floor are part of the generational curses that got left behind. And you have that same exact power. You just have to recognize it. You just have to take the opportunities when you can cut those chains and do it. It can look like just simply having honest conversations, like I just said. It can look like creating healthy boundaries when it's necessary. It can look like, probably one of the most valuable ways is it can look like the form of taking extensive therapy sessions to unpack the inner child wounds and recognize them all, or doing forgiveness work that frees your energy from things that you might feel tied to. Rather than excusing the harm that was done in your life, you can do that healing work and you can leave those things behind. I've walked that road. It requires some intestinal fortitude. So if it's something that you're thinking about, it takes a little bit of courage, but at a certain point, you got to take the leap. It can require tears, uncomfortable talks. Sometimes it can require you to have to take distance from certain people and places to gain clarity. But every time I chose those patterns in my own life over the old ones, I felt lighter. I felt so much lighter every single day, until my modalities around each one of these different subjects completely shifted, and so did my life as a direct result. Having hope to overcome this particular area in life isn't naive. It's radical defiance. I think it's personified. It's a direct spit in the face of the expected life patterns that defined the fate of all those generations before you. But that's not you. You're better. And I hate that saying that I've heard from some very unhealthy family members, the ones who have refused to change for many years. And despite many different conversations and lessons that were available to them, they still refuse to change, and they carry the cycle forward. They've said, you think you're so much better. Well, yes and no. I think I've done better than them in this type of work. I definitely think I'm more advanced intrinsically and spiritually and in certain ways. Does it make me better? It certainly doesn't make me worse. It makes me better in the sense of like being better from an illness. Like you were sick and then you got better, like that kind of better. Yeah, absolutely. It's better in the sense that I don't make unhealthy family members feel valued, like their ego is going to require. So it's like I'm not better, but I'm better than that. I'm better than letting these circumstances define who I am anymore. And I hope someday you get better too. I hope that you're able to say that. So maybe it's not me who actually thinks I'm better. Maybe it's you who thinks I'm better, and you can't handle that. So you throw shade to try to dim a light that's too bright for your dark world. Sorry, that's not going to work anymore. It's not going to work that way. Better get some sunglasses. But you're not better. You just have higher standards is what it is. They say that, but it's not that you're better. It's just that your standards are much higher, and you're going to live a life that is much more meaningful and purposeful, and you're not going to let them bring you down, and you're not going to lower your standards for anybody else. That doesn't say I'm better than you. It just clearly says I can love you and still choose a different way for myself and for the generations that come after me. So that's the big one. These other two are a lot shorter, but that first big one was huge. That first of the three modalities is go after those family wounds and change that DNA. And epigenetics are a real thing. Go research it. Joe Dispenza, like I said, talks a lot about it. The guy's brilliant. So the second modality of metamorphosis, tongue twister, modality of metamorphosis. The second modality is the traumatic events that we do go through. Those lightning strikes in life that can rewire your entire nervous system and leave lasting imprints for so long. For me, cancer was that lightning strike, and it struck twice. In the words to the song of the podcast, the theme song of the podcast, Somewhere Beautiful, it says lightning struck my center twice. And for me, that 2-time lightning strike was cancer, struck my core twice. And the physical toll of those surgeries and the treatments and the mental battle with the fear and the spiritual questioning of, well, why is this happening? Those days where my body felt foreign, like it was betraying me, and every single ache that was happening felt like a whole new panic. The world expected me to just get back to normal after something like that. You get a few weeks off for your treatment and they give you family leave and whatever else. And then you're just supposed to get back to life as normal. Like the death knocking on your door didn't affect you at all. And grappling with your mortality and seeing all these other people who were going through similar circumstances. And, it's how do you get back to normal after all of that? But normal for me after something like that was permanently altered. And it's the same for pretty much every single person out there. If you've ever experienced a significant amount of trauma, you know what that's like. You kind of remember the world before those moments, and the world gets completely changed for you after those moments. If you've been through those things, if you've been overseas, if you've seen some of those things, you're working those jobs, public safety, you're a nurse, there's so many different things. You could just be somebody. We have a close friend who just happened to witness 9/11. It was happening and has broken down in tears, was seeing it from a distance, but I can't imagine witnessing something like that. And your life completely changes from that point forward. And it's lightning, it strikes your core unexpectedly. There are traumas that we can face beyond the illness. It can be the sudden loss of somebody. It can be something that's extremely traumatic, the betrayal of shattered trust. I mean, that's huge in people's lives. It uproots everything in your life. Obviously there'd be abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual. The stolen innocence that comes from circumstance like that. Yeah, accidents can happen. It's just so many different things. Violence that we can witness, or survived something. But these events don't just happen to you. They embed in your body in significant ways. They go into every fiber of your being. It creates hypervigilance and triggers and flashbacks and emotional numbness, or the constant feeling of being on edge at all times. It just completely changes your entire life. It becomes a default setting. And society often rushes people with this sort of move on mindset or stay strong and, power through it all. I witnessed that in my previous career. I mean, one of my most traumatic nights, it was like I called a trusted person and tried to talk to them about the situation that happened. It was part of the job. And it was literally like, we'll go rub some dirt in it, go finish writing your reports and take it easy the rest of the night. It was like, that's all I got. It wasn't even like wasn't even rub dirt in it. It was like, go rub some salt in it and just go back to life as normal. And there's nothing that follows up with that. And a lot of times in our life, when we go through those traumas, there's nobody sitting there on the other side that's like a grief counselor to say, like, how did that circumstance change the way that you view the world? That's something we need to do for ourselves. And I don't care if that trauma was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago. The moment you can look at that and you can transmute it and you can dig into it, your life will 100% shift in ways you never dreamed. It's basically like a dam that is blocking the flow of vital life force in your life. And it has been since it happened. And unless you move on from it in the right ways, it's going to continue to do so. So making that shift is important. That shift happens when you move from denial or suppression to that event that it happened or didn't happen. Like, it happened. You move from that denial and suppression into integration. You don't erase the scar that happened to you. You respect what it represents. It's proof that you survived something incredibly difficult. And not a lot of people can say that. It's something that tried to break you and it didn't, because you're still here. And then from that point, you begin the alchemical work of turning that pain into purpose. You try to find the purpose of what that was supposed to teach you in your life. In my case, the cancer journey came as a catalyst for me refusing to waste time on anything that didn't matter in my life anymore. Every medical no became a louder internal yes to living with presence and passion and purpose. And your trauma can become your testimony of not giving up on anything. Your life doesn't have to be a polished highlight reel. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to be a raw and honest story of resilience. And that raw, honest story of resilience can inspire so many people and remind you of your own strength every single time you're going to face adversity, because it's not just that one time. Life is about surviving those adversities. And the practical steps that helped me through all of that, and I recommend this all the time. You guys have heard me say it if you listen to the show. Journaling is a huge one. Journaling to externalize that story out of your brain, get it out of there, and it helps you create some distance between you and that thing that happened. And it's huge. Somatic practices like movement and breath work and body-based therapies, those are massive. The release of that stored energy, when you're actually moving, when you're doing something to take that energy that's balled up inside you and you're getting it out in certain ways. For me, that was smashing the punching bag for 30 years now. It became one of my most poignant methods of release. And people who knew me and who have seen me do it can attest to that. Like, man, you must have gone through a lot of stuff, because that bag is just, it is like it's your worst enemy. I have gotten some of the best therapy with, leather gloves strapped around my hands. Nothing clears the head like having to focus on hitting someone and not getting hit back. But I joke, but seriously, the body movement of getting that trauma out in certain ways is amazing. Trauma-informed support is probably one of the hugest ways you can do it too. Somebody who really knows what they're doing. And then adopting some spiritual practices that reconnect you to something greater than the pain that you experience in your life. Because that pain can be extremely significant. But once you tap into what your own potential spirituality is and what that actually feels like, a higher version of what this world is, a higher version of yourself even, it makes that pain just shrink down so small. It's like when you discover the different things about the universe, like I've talked about it quite a few times where, at first we thought that the earth was the center of the universe. And at a certain point, we displaced the earth from the center of the universe and we went to the sun was in the center of the universe. And then we discovered the Milky Way, and we thought the Milky Way galaxy was the entire universe, and that this little tiny cloud that we could see in the sky that we called the Andromeda Nebula, we discovered that was an entirely new galaxy. And then with the discovery of the James Webb Telescope, we could see that there's 100,000 galaxies in a picture of the sky. It's the size of a grain of rice at the arm's length, if you held a grain of rice out at the arm's length and took a picture of the sky that big, there was 100,000 galaxies in that little spot. What I'm getting at is your pain can shrink down that much when you discover what your own spirituality is like. Your own life can just seem like it's only so big. And then when you realize there's something so much bigger and greater and grander than that thing that you're making your entire life revolve around, it shrinks that thing down to such insignificance that it's still there, but it no longer has the influence that it had over your life because you realize there's so much more in your life than what you previously believed in. So you get there. You get there one modality at a time, one day, one breath, one choice. And eventually that's where you reclaim all of your power. The third one, the third modality metamorphosis, I can do this without the tongue twister, is the societal restrictions, the external boxes and the barriers that try to predetermine your ceiling in your life. The race, the class, the gender expectations, the accent, where you've come from. These factors can create very real obstacles in your life. And if you haven't experienced those types of things, then you really have no idea. Me as a Caucasian man in Western Massachusetts, I have not really experienced these. I have experienced certain doors close in ways that I thought they were closed, and certain different things that may have happened on a very limited basis. So I understand it to a certain extent, but in other ways, there's no way I can understand how deep the adversities actually can go for certain people. But again, it's not a comparative process. But I do recognize that these things are a very real obstacle for many people. And that's why this is the third pillar of these modalities that you have to shift in your life. Opportunities can flow to those types of people with hardly any type of effort. And for others, the opportunities don't come no matter how hard you work. And I can't imagine what that feels like, because we had taught all along that the hard work is what actually connects us to that grand place that we're going to end up someday. If we just keep on working harder, we'll get there. And how many times have you seen people who were just born with a silver spoon and they just get those opportunities left and right, and they don't really have to work that hard for them at all? More times than I can count and care to think about. And there's messages you get from people when you do stick yourself out there that are either subtle or overt, and they say that your dreams aren't realistic for someone like you, right? I've felt some of those echoes in my own journey. Growing up in a working class environment, hearing comments like, higher education or the big visions aren't for people like us. I've heard those things. The economic area that I've grown up in is very challenged. Watching how limited resources can really shape people's opportunities. The place that you grow up in can sometimes be a trap for you as well. And that, prejudice and bias can operate in certain ways, sometimes very quiet ways, but they're still there. They're still there and they're operating. And that's coming from, again, a guy who's a white male in rural Western Massachusetts. I can't imagine what kind of challenges are out there for people, not only in this country of opportunity, but for people around the world who face huge uphill obstacles of classist and sexist type of things. I mean, there are some significant barriers for people in places around the world that many of us have no idea about. And no matter what those restrictions are, they can really be those chains that plant the seeds of doubt that say, I'm not allowed to deserve these things. Well, who am I? Who am I to dream? And that's where you've got to really change those things, because the liberating truth is your soul has a purpose. It does not have a postal code. Your worth is not determined by melanin or money or background. When the world tries to vote no on your potential, you need to let that rejection that you might perceive, because it's not real, you got to let that rejection become rocket fuel. Because history's full of people who rose from some of the deepest disadvantages, from poverty to systemic racism and class barriers, not the limits that define them. They basically defined the limits and broke them. And that's what defined them. They refused to let those limits define who they were in their identity, or their effort for that matter. Their effort, if anything, was increased because of those limitations that they identified and smashed through. So when I said earlier that you have to give the beast a name, and that way you can go after it and slay the beast, identify it. If this is one of the areas that's holding your life back, identify it. There's no sense in deluding yourself and saying these things don't exist. Some people like to say that some of these things don't exist anymore. Well, if you're feeling like it does, then smash through it. It's there for you. It's real. So identify it and smash through whatever that is that's holding you back. The hope for who you want to become is your quiet revolution. So protect it. Feed it with daily small victories and consistent actions, and surround yourself with people who see your greatness rather than your limitations. Educate yourself relentlessly and build your skills. Claim your space unapologetically. Put yourself out there. Defiance doesn't have to be loud anger, right? It doesn't have to be a voice that's argumentative. It doesn't have to be someone who's kicking down the door, but it's basically someone who just continues knocking at that door. Eventually, that door's going to fall in. It's persistence and focused action in the direction of your calling. And the Modality Metamorphosis has that conclusion stage where you identify all of those different areas in your life. You figure out which ones, maybe all three of them, are things you need to blast through and reconfigure in your life. But after that, you own the fire and not the ashes that adversity leaves behind. And that's the conclusion stage of it all. You own the fire that exists in every one of those areas. You've named the beast and you've burned it down. And then you rebuild from there. The ashes of grief and rage and shame and regret and fear, they all exist. But beneath the ashes are glowing embers. And your anger towards those things, that raw fire that you can build out of all of this process, your anger is the raw life force. And that life force is going to build the life that you truly love. And it's one that's going to be free of those chains. Your grief is the love that is basically, it's lost its form in certain places. The question is whether you are going to let those ashes bury you, or you're going to use the fire to light your path. After I went through all those cancer treatments, there were mornings that the emotional ashes that were left behind, they felt kind of suffocating. You know, the thoughts of like, what if it comes back? It was there. It was real. It weighed heavy. And I learned to sit with those feelings without judgment. And I learned to feel them fully. You know, that second modality of the trauma. Had to sit there and think about it fully, and then consciously redirect that energy at a certain point into a fire that burned into different directions of my life. I couldn't just sit there anymore. If life was going to be so limited, I couldn't stay in that place anymore. I had to take some direct action and get moving. And the physical movement reminded me that I was still alive. As soon as I was able to start strapping gloves back on again, I started moving. And eventually, 5 years after that second case, I jumped back into the ring after working very, very hard for 5 years, and in a minute and 12 seconds, won by knockout in the first round. It was something that I was told I was never going to be able to do. And I refused to take that no for an answer. You know, you take that fire and you turn it into something huge, and those embers are glowing underneath those ashes. You got to do it by creating different conversations, like this one that we're having today on the podcast. You talk with people about these kinds of things, and it's going to light those fires for you. You're going to move through things. You're going to talk with people, and it's going to build up hope, and it's going to build momentum in your life. And you're going to find more appreciation for your life throughout the process, and for yourself, for that matter, for making it through adversity and recognizing that life has more to offer than some of the places that we feel like we've come from, and it's not the chains that's going to hold you back anymore. You know, your refusal to sleepwalk through whatever time you have left in life is what I think you need to value most. So wake up today, stop sleepwalking. What if your hardest lessons that you learned in life were the exact forge that were meant to temper that steel of the character that you had today? You know, what if you never went through those character defining moments and you didn't become the strong person that you were? You know, so look at it that way and stop agonizing and apologizing over the different things that you might have in your life that people view as a flaw. You know, your intensity, your passion, and your drive, those aren't things to be ashamed of. If anything, those are traits that some people would die to have in their life. So use those, recognize that they're rare. The world needs people who have walked through the darkness and emerged carrying the light for others. And that, my friend, is you. If you've been through that fire, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If this story touches something within you, know that your story carries just as much equal power. We're all in this together, fam. So I want you to take a moment right now and recognize if your fire is burning or not today. Where are you going from here? What places have been weighing down on you, and what are you ready to start alchemizing your life? Name it honestly. If anything, write it down. Speak it out loud after you've written it down. Speak it to someone who's safe. Offer it in prayer, whatever you need to do. Ask yourself, what's the next chapter that I get to author after all of this? And if you want to dive in deeper on this, send me an email with the subject Modality Metamorphosis. Send it to connect@livethislife.org. That's CONNECT@livethislife.org. And we can dive into this deeper together. We can maybe schedule a brief conversation, and I can put you in the direction of some of these things to dive into this a little bit deeper. But just remember that you're not your wounds. You are not your past. You are not the boxes that other people try to put you in. You are the survivor and the healer and the creator, the one who constantly rises over and over. So take one tangible step today. I don't care if it's small. Set a boundary, journal a reframed story of your life, speak a truth that you've been holding on to, but do something, move your body, do something to get yourself out there and moving. And reach out for support. Affirm your worth through it all and take action toward that dream despite the fear. If this episode stirred something within you, please share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Tag me or the podcast wherever you do if you share it on social media. Or tag me and send me a message, DM me on any one of the social media platforms. Or again, send those messages to connect@livethislife.org. But let's keep building this community of people who refuse to let adversity write the next chapter of their lives. That's what this is all about. All right, guys, until next time, are you living this life, or are you just killing time? Choose life, choose healing, choose growth, choose you, and choose to rewrite the story with fierce, unapologetic hope. Much love to each one of you guys. Take a deep breath. You have already survived so much. The best and most beautiful chapters are still unfolding. So turn the page.